Are you yourself a fan of the idea of the roundup? You know, looking at the end of the year.
I don't know, I've got like a kind of love-hate thing about them. Like, I read them and can't resist reading them almost. They appear and I'm like, oh, I've got to see it, I've got to know what they put. And then about a minute after reading it, I get really, really angry for a while and then kind of moan to all my, like, you know, music friend snobs about it and stuff like.
Yeah. So you immediately start arguing with the choice.
Yeah, the choice and just the premise of the whole thing and like what are these people doing, and I get really cynical about it. And like, you know, this is just about. Often I'll decide this is just about the magazine. This has got nothing to do with the music or anything, and you know, really predictable things will happen, and there'll be bizarre token gestures. You know, I'll decide that there's, I don't know, casual racism and sexism and stuff appearing in these things and all sorts of like, and then get really, really angry, and then everybody's just like, calm down, Kieran. Yeah. It's only a rubbish list in a magazine.
Yeah. No, I think you're quite right to take them seriously in a way. It's interesting that they've become more prevalent as well, and they become more mainstream. Everybody kind of does them now. They get discussed everywhere. You know, once upon a time they were a fairly conventionally nerdy thing, but now in a way that the whole world's kind of become nerdy and loves the list and the genres and the idea. They're sort of everywhere, aren't they? And I wonder whether you felt that, you know, to some extent, for my days, they were places where you might have found new music and they were a little bit more unsettling, whereas now they seem to confirm prejudices.
Yeah, totally. It's like, and because of the problem I was saying earlier about the guilty pleasure of looking at it, everybody must be rubbing their hands together this year. Not only can they do the end of the year, but they can do the end of the decade. Yeah. Everybody can go crazy on it. You know, you can have pages and pages of this stuff at the moment. But from the point of view, like you're saying, maybe using it to introduce people to music and things like that agenda seems to have gone out of the window completely. It's more like a moment where everyone can be like, oh, weren't we so right championing these great records? We think they're the best records of the year. You know?
Yes. And taking risks a little bit with the choices, you know, it'd be fantastic if some of I mean, I think they are, if you know what I mean.
You can tell where they think they are. Like, you can look at the list and you can see, oh, they've chosen these two records so that they look a bit kooky and so they look different to the other magazines, you know. Yeah. They always put a curveball in there to, like, give them their identity.
And does it help you make your mind up about what's just happened? Does it give you a sort of, you know, a map almost of the territory we've just crossed, or does it infuriate you because it doesn't resemble anything that you've just been doing?
Yeah, usually has pretty much nothing to do with what I'm interested in. Like, oh, these 4 Libertines albums were in the top 10 albums of the decade, and I've probably only heard a couple of the songs, you know. Yeah. And I'm like, are you really telling me like all their albums were better than everything else going on? It's stuff like that. Like, logically, it never makes sense to me. And I'm also someone with a really eclectic music taste, listening to quite a wide variety of stuff. And even when I'm thinking in terms of, for myself, like, oh, I wonder what my favourite records are, you get into a situation where you're like, am I really going to sit here and compare, I know, Tamane Diabate and Animal Collective or something, you know, like, maybe that's just ridiculous.
It seems to have increased a lot, the need to categorise and list and control and put everything in order. Everybody's very, like you say, because it's the end of the decade, it gives them double the opportunity. Everybody seems incredibly excited about this, you know, almost putting everything in a kind of zoo, I guess. It's a kind of form of architecture that makes everyone feel consoled somehow.
It adds a slight kind of competitive element to the whole thing. I think people, you know, if they see one of their favourite records in that top 10, they're like, yeah, you know, I really know what I'm on about music and stuff. And I think it's, for me, I'm very irritated by the whole world of kind of music journalism nowadays, just because there's no room for anybody to do it very much. You know, like, reviews and things are 2 or 3 lines nowadays in most magazines and stuff. I don't see many kind of in-depth articles around. I think the only music magazine that comes out that I probably properly read is Wax Poetics, I think, which is a magazine that has like proper kind of in-depth articles about stuff, and all these just endless kind of like little bursts of random information. They're never kind of enough for me, and I think the whole lists thing is just more of that. It's just really, really easy reading, and it seems like it's something important at the time, but it's also if you think about it at all, it seems totally meaningless.
The albums you made 2001 and 3, I guess there were a lot in the end of the year roundups. I mean, how does that make you feel?
Third Four Tet album Rounds did really well in these like end of year roundups. And then in the January afterwards, the sales of my records doubled off the back of the round. It actually had quite a big like impact on what was going on in my life. And you know, I can't deny that it wasn't exciting to know that I was hitting a whole new kind of audience. You know, I definitely saw the power of them at that moment. I remember at the time HMV would do a roundup of the roundups, and I got in that, and then, you know, suddenly selling loads more records. So that was, mind you, you know, I don't think it's probably not like that at the moment. You know, I think the way people buy records has changed so much.
Even within that time span.
Definitely a huge amount. Like, you know, talking like 2003 was very, very different to how things are now. You know, probably maybe get more hits on your MySpace or something. But I don't know if you're going to sell more records and things.
The objective view of what's happened over the last few years has more to do with those shifts in the way music is received, and indeed in this way kind of gauged and judged and boxed off. There seems to be a tremendous, you know, change in that over the last few years.
A few years ago, YouTube didn't exist, you know, whereas people like check out so much music on YouTube now and things. But I'm also, you know, everybody's like doing this kind of roundup of the decade at the moment and looking at all these things. I'm someone who's really, really wary of that concept of trying to reflect on something too quickly. And one of the things that's really important for me just with making music is how it sounds in like 20 or 30 years time, you know, and the relevance then. And like I make records and I think a lot about, you know, how it's really important to me that I can look back on everything I've done and see like some kind of coherent sense in it and understand why it all happened, so that when I look back on it in 30 years or whatever, it makes some sort of sense to me. And I feel the same way about looking back at all of music in general. I think you look back really early and you know, these roundups of the decade now, I'm sure in 10 years time they're going to look absurd, you know, like, and if you looked at roundups from magazines in the 70s, I know Rolling Stone or something, you know, they'll tell you the greatest records and bands in the world were probably, I know, Grand Funk Railroad and Elton John or something, and you know, they'll tell you that Velvet Underground didn't matter and there was no interesting jazz music going on, and you know, funk didn't exist or something like that. You know, like it's really, really disturbing if you look back to all these things. But people never learn in the slightest. Like, you know, especially magazines and stuff, they don't learn that, or they care less than ever that what they do stands the test of time at the moment. Without
wanting to say that it was a decade, and without wanting to say it was the noughties, how do you perceive what the last few years have been like, if you like, without saying sum up your noughties?
I started kind of in the late 90s. I was at college and things, and then got a record deal with the band Fridge I was in. And I found that from that moment onwards, when we got the record deal and I quit college and I moved back to London, that's this kind of new mentality kicked into me, this kind of like wake-up call almost, being, you know, it never occurred to me that I could just be a musician all the time almost. Like, and I think from that moment onwards where I realised that I was in this amazing kind of like privileged sort of place where, you know, I'd left college and I was just going to do music all the time, I kind of made this decision to just like go for it. Like I wanted to try every little element. I would just kind of say yes to whatever people were suggesting I had to go at, you know, and I just knew somehow I wanted to be someone that wasn't like, I know, just a guitar player in a band or something. I wanted to be someone who would like DJ one week and produce an album the next. I see the last 10 years as me taking that, just following that path almost of like, you know, getting excited about things in music and following them. You know, I look back at the last 10 years, I feel really good about it. I feel pretty proud. I feel like I've had amazing experience. A big turning point for me in the decade was kind of around 2005 when Everything Ecstatic came out, which was like the fourth Four Tet album. And that was, of all the records I've done, that's the one that involved the biggest touring schedule, biggest press schedule and all those things. The final show I did in London at the end was at Hammersmith Palais, and we did this big night, and Faust came and played. You know, it was like this incredible night for me, sold out. It was like me and Faust and Explosions in the Sky and Kid Koala, this like wild lineup. And I was like, this is bliss. You know, I was like, we've got this room full of young kids like watching Faust, you know, like who were like, and they brought all their like industrial equipment and stuff, and I was playing and I just thought, this is really, really like, this is perfect. But that moment when I was like, this is perfect, I was like, well, it's done. Oh, like I've done it. Like I've done. I wasn't in there thinking like, now we need to really start pushing up the marketing so we can do Brixton next time or something. I was like, no, actually I'm completely done. I was like, I want to do, got to think about something else now. I just met Steve Reed around then. It was at that point that I really went whole hog for the stuff I was doing with him. It was so refreshing just to play with another musician. and do something that was more of a collaboration. Like it got a bit too complacent, you know, doing these shows on my own. They're all going really, really well, but I wasn't in a scary situation. You know, I wanted to feel that pressure a bit, and you know, to find myself then standing on stage with someone who I consider one of the great musicians alive today, not knowing what we're going to play. You know, that was a whole whole other thing. And when I look back over the decade, because that's what we're talking about, decisions like that, those moments, those are the brilliant things. So I'm just like, you know, the moment when I was like, decided, all right, I've played with Faust, best quit. You know, it's those moments that I'm like, damn, that's when I did it right. Oh, I totally nailed it. Excellent. You know, and that it's if I was doing my own top 10 of my experiences of the decade, you know, it's probably really random things that no one would expect. It's things like that. You know?
That randomness is interesting as well, because it's possibly at the heart of one of the things a musician does, and it's something that the media and the consumer world is very much opposed to in a way. They can't stand the randomness. It seems to be those moments you talk about, you know, your top 10 will be much more random. That's when I get excited about the idea of a top 10, if you like. The top 10 itself isn't a box, but it's a thing that just throws everything open.
When I look at anything from the past, especially connected to music, things that change your expectations are always the exciting things. I feel that way about music in itself. You know, that's what I'm looking for, is people, you know, who innovate, you know, come along and present an idea that you hadn't even anticipated before, and it blows your mind. I don't think anyone's even trying to do anything like that with any top 10 in this world at the moment.
The top 10 is opposed to that almost, as much as it pretends that it's saying, you know, this was the best. It's sort of opposed to that actual experimental view, isn't it?
Me and a small group of friends have a little like email kind of list thing where we just exchange information about new records that have come out we're interested in, like shows that are coming to town. Like we all discuss like our records of the year at the end of the year, and that's the only place I go to where I actually know someone's going to email me and be like, I checked this out and it was fantastic, and I'll bother to, and it'll be something I've never heard of. And I look at those lists pure, I don't care who's at what position or who said what about what. All I care about is mentions of records on there that I haven't heard of, because I want to see those. Whereas if I look at a top 10 list in a magazine, you know, it's very rare that you see things you haven't heard of. If you haven't heard of them, they're probably like way out in some other universe that you just don't care about at all. You know, like you don't want to, you know, like there'll be lots of records appearing in these top 10s that I've heard of but never heard any of the music. And it doesn't make me think, oh, I should check out the music now it's been in this top 10. It makes me think I probably almost definitely shouldn't check out this music. I'm probably more interested in a top 10 coming from an individual as well, rather than, I think when you have something, you know, top 10 at a magazine or a website or something, you're going to have like this team of like 40 people and they all make their votes. And what you end up getting is quite a weird kind of like a mixture of stuff, where someone just giving me their personal view, that's maybe a bit more interesting.